So as a regular teacher of the tradition, sometimes teaching the tradition for the tradition's sake, and sometimes finding in the tradition that which you need to think about, and sometimes both simultaneously. Every once in a while, I have a week like this where I think when I'm starting to study the Parsha in order to teach it, I'm just going to take it where it's going to organically go. And then once I realized where I arrived at, I realized, given the week that I had, or at least a couple of the encounters that I had, the text was directing me, or I was sort of unconsciously directing myself to find this kind of material, right? And that'll come clear in a little bit. Meaning, I think that the material that I'm going to teach today is hopefully interesting and informative to anyone. But I realized once I got through a certain text that I was unconsciously searching for material that was going to help me process through a couple of encounters that I had this week. I think when we do that too much in the text, we use the text as a prop, and using the text to inform our lives and interactions is a holy thing. Using it as a prop reduces it. But sometimes it's saying the exact things that we need to hear, and that is another way of understanding eternal holiness. What we're going to do is we're going to read a verse. We're going to get to a Rashi in the verse. We're going to spend a considerable amount of time on the original midrashic text that Rashi drew from. We're going to go on a biblical little meandering through the biblical text that the midrash brings, and then one more Hasidic text at the end, just so you can get a sense of where we're going with this. And we start with the opening lines of Parshat Vayiggash that Marshall read before. The Parsha begins resolving a cliffhanger from the end of the previous week, right? That Benjamin is in the prison, and the brothers have to figure out, how are they going to kind of come to terms with who they are in the presence of this viceroy without knowing that he's Joseph yet, and is this all of the awful things they've done so far in their lives coming back to them? How are they going to go back to Jacob, having violated the promise that they're going to bring Benjamin back after Jacob specifically said, I've already lost one child, I'm not going to lose another child. It's very tense at the end of Parshat Vayiggash. And then we begin with this verse. Vayigash elav Yehuda. Yehuda vayigash towards him. Vayigash means to approach, to come close. Vayomer, and Yehuda said, Bi Adoni. Bi is sort of, it's probably not necessarily like a declension of the preposition ba and the e. Like be on its own would mean like within me or to me. It's more here a term of beseeching. So it's a version of na. Please, my Lord. My Lord is referring to the person who does not yet know as Joseph. Yidaber na avdecha. This is polite biblical talk. May your servant speak, and your servant is me. Right? Judah is speaking to Joseph. He doesn't know as Joseph, and is saying, "Let your servant," meaning me, daber davar. Let me say a word. Ba'oznei Adoni, in the ears of my Lord. My Lord meaning you, right? So neither the first person or the second person is used. V'al yichar apcha be'avdecha. Let not, it's translated here as let not be angry. Literally, may your nostrils not flame upon your servant. Again, your servant meaning me. Ki chamocha kifaro. The double ka here is hard to render in perfect English because the ka means like. If we try to translate it literally, because like you is like Pharaoh, what it's saying is because you are like Pharaoh, right? It's, every language has a different way of articulating these things, right? Put it together, Judah takes it upon himself to be the one who's going to achieve the reconciliation. He's using polite language, referring to Joseph as my Lord, referring to himself as your servant. He's requesting to say a few words. He wants to say a few words into this man's ears. He's asking in advance, please don't be angry. And he's kind of lifting him up by saying, you're basically a Pharaoh. On the surface, any questions or comments on the verse before we look at the Rashi? And we'll pass around the microphone so that people on the Zoom can hear if anybody wants to add something. Questions, or if you are reading this verse for the first time, and maybe it's your first time looking at it slowly, What jumps out at you? Phrases or content or ideas? Alan and then Gary, hold on.
It's the first word that gets me, Vayigash. What does that really mean to approach someone, and how do you do it? Is it in terms of he's approaching you to fight? Is he approaching you to make a big request? Are you approaching him? What's the purpose of Vayigash?
Good, and you can ask that question on two levels. You can ask the question internal to the story, and you can ask the question on the editorial level, right? On the editorial level, as it were, why is that word used as opposed to a different word? It could have been vayabo. It could have just been vayedaber, and he spoke. Why do we have this rather uncommon extra notion that there was an approach? And then internal to the story, right? How is an approach different than a coming? And how is an approach in speaking different than just a speaking? Good, what else?
Why is he assuming already that he's going to be angry?
Good. But sometimes when you appease someone in advance by saying, please don't be angry with me, it's a successful tactic because you might soften the ears of the person you're talking to. Sometimes you might put the person on guard, right? The person may not have assumed that anything you were going to say was going to anger them. And if I say to you, don't be angry at me, you know you're about to hear something that is liable to anger you, right? So again, you can ask that on two levels. Why does the editor add that in? Why does the Holy One or the editor add it in? And what does it mean inside the narrative of the story that Judah is either nervous that he is going to anger him, that's why he says not to, or feels that it will be effective to soften the blow of what he's going to say by saying, I'm coming as a friend, right? But anything else in the verse itself? Okay, yes, Marshall. One sec, Marshall. Marshall, hold on.
I just noticed that the word Avdecha is mentioned twice and Adoni are mentioned twice.
Good. So if you're just looking at the verse and seeing how words pop up, your servant and my Lord are both present twice in the verse. Good. Let's look at Rashi. Rashi picks on some of the stuff that you were discussing. So Rashi's first comment on the verses, Vayigash elav ... daber ba'oznei adoni. So he picks up, and those of you in my Rashi class know this, the words in bold at the beginning of a Rashi, which are the words in the verse upon which Rashi is commenting, are called the diburei hamatchil, the opening words. But those words are not necessarily words that Rashi bolded, by which I mean we are surmising after the fact, based on his comment, that these are the words in the verse he was commenting on. But we don't have in the original Rashi him saying, I'm now commenting on these words. It's just a running commentary. So at some point, an editor of a manuscript said, based on what we're about to say, it must mean that it's this part of the verse he's commenting on. He's commenting on both the notion of the approach and this interesting phrase, let me say a word, a davar ba'oznei adoni, into the ears of my servant. Rashi says 3 words. And he's saying 3 words in Judah's voice, meaning sometimes Rashi kind of is speaking with his voice. Sometimes his comment is entering into the story, almost like a bibliodrama that I would do. And he's speaking inside the character of the character. It's this way this time. Rashi says it's as if Yehuda was saying, Yikansu dvarai be'oznecha. May my words, dvarai, yikansu, enter into, penetrate, be'oznecha, your ears. What's the force of that? Right? What has Rashi added that was not there before? Another way of thinking about this, what notion about the words is Rashi trying to disabuse us of? He's saying, it doesn't mean this, it means this. What is he saying when he says that it means, may my words penetrate? What are you asking someone when you're asking that my words penetrate? Mark, take the mic. Yeah.
Otherwise, the original could have said, he just said, instead of, I want to put words into your ear. So maybe he's focusing on what the nature of hearing is as opposed to seeing.
Good.
Anyway.
Good. So he's definitely responding to the fact that the phraseology is interesting, that let a word be said in your ears. If someone says to you, Mark or anyone, before they begin saying something momentous to you, I pray let my words really enter into your ears. What are they asking you to do?
To really listen very carefully.
Be-
What I'm saying is important.
Either listen carefully because what I'm saying is important, or listen carefully because I'm concerned that you're not going to like, or you're not interested, right? Right? We've all said this to a child at a time or a friend. Like, I want you to listen to what I'm saying, to catch their attention, not because they're necessarily not going to like what they hear, but they might be distracted. They have other things on their mind. So Rashi says what Judah is saying to Joseph is, in a polite way, listen carefully, please. This is significant. I know that you have many cases that come before you, right? I want my word. You're going to want to hear this. It's a version of you're going to want to hear this, right? It's a plea for attention. And then Rashi, in some ways, balances that with how he understands v'al yichar apecha, may not your nostril flare. Rashi says, mikan ata lamed, from this language, when Judah says, may not your nostrils flare, you learn, shediber alav kashot, that he spoke to him. Who spoke to who? Judah spoke to Joseph, kashot, harshly, right? If what Rashi is saying is, if Judah had not spoken rather firmly to a vice president, right, of ancient Egypt, had he spoken gently, he wouldn't have had to request him not to get angry at him. But from the fact that he's asking that this not anger Joseph, it's as if the text is admitting that Judah had some tude, right? He had a certain presence. He was demanding, right? So look what Rashi's done in two comments. Comment number one, appease. Comment number two, a recognition that he's speaking forcefully, right? Think of any complicated diplomacy, whether it's geopolitical or familial or spousal or between a parent and a child, and think of how significant balancing both of those are. Please listen to me. It's so important that what I say get into your ears. And I'm going to speak very straight because I need to get this off my chest. Please don't be angry at me, but I understand why you would be, which is why I'm requesting that you not be. So Rashi is flooding an enormous amount of what we would consider like psychological insight and how to have a hard conversation into this opening line, which we recognize and read the verse is different than it could have been written. It could have been written simpler. From the fact that it wasn't written simpler, Rashi says there's a lot going on here. Now, there's a lot going on here. There's also a lot more going on in at least one of the midrashim from which Rashi calls. Rashi knew the midrash by heart, friends, right? And when I say by heart, I really kind of mean by heart. He didn't have Google, right? He knew by recall, any reference in the entire Talmud where this story appears, he knew it. And any reference in the midrash, he knew it. And what he does on each verse of the Torah is basically cull through all of that and deliver the material that he thinks is most interesting. But thanks to modern academic texts, we can annotate where Rashi gets his material from. And it's pretty clear, as you're about to see, that Rashi was basing this a little bit selectively on this midrash from Breshit Rabbah. What is Breshit Rabbah? Breshit Rabbah is the classic agadic, meaning narrative midrash on the Torah. It's not halachic material. It's filling in the space in between the letters for what really was happening in the story. Okay, so this is Breshit Rabbah, chapter 93, number 6. Davar acher, another thing, meaning that this is not the first midrash that the Breshit Rabbah says on this verse. Vigash elav Yehuda, Judah approached him. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nehemiah, Rabbanan. This is a classic rabbinic way of saying we're about to introduce a machloket or a difference of opinion between several rabbis, and it's like the midrash is laying out what he called the dramatis personae at the beginning of a play. These are the folks who are going to be disagreeing with each other. It's going to be Rabbi Yehuda against Rabbi Nehemiah against Rabbanan, meaning the rest of the rabbis. We don't know what they're saying yet, which is that there are the players in this machloket, this interaction. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, and interestingly, one of the rabbis commenting on what Yehuda, the character, says is a Rabbi Yehuda. That may be a nothing, right? Sometimes cigars are cigars, or sometimes it's interesting that it's the namesake of the character that's speaking. Rabbi Yehuda Mer, Hagasha la milchama. This is going back to what Alan said before, right? One way which you can approach someone in a tense situation is in a warlike stance. He approached him as if he was in battle. He approached him with the with a hope to overpower, right? He approached him with muscles flexed. Heichma de atamar, just like it says, again, this is a classic midrashic text, if the word in the verse that we're dealing with, that we're trying to understand, is Vayigash, and we're not sure what Vayigash means here, why don't we look at another place in the Bible where that root is used, and maybe the context is more obvious there, and we can import that context into our context. So we are taken to the second book of Samuel, chapter 10, verse 13. And now we want to go into a little bit of a rabbit hole. So now turn to the second page, and we're going to look at a few verses from the second book of Samuel. So second book of Samuel means that we are deep into the line of kingship in ancient Israel. We're after the reign of King David. And there's a lot of biblical material here that stretches from about, 980, 970 BCE until the 800 or 700s, depending on how you historicize the book of Samuel. And we're going to learn about one of the, I can't remember if it's a son or a grandson of King David, King Joab or Yoav. Okay. Vayitzu b'nei Ammon, the Ammonites, who were enemies of ours, emerged. Vayarchu milchama Yisura, in the middle of page 2, they set up a war, Petach Hashar, at the entrance to the gate, Va'aram Sova, while the Arameans of the town of Tsova, Urachov v'ish tov umacha lebadam basadeh, and all these people took made separate camps around where Yoav was in place as the king. Vayar Yoav, and Yoav, who was the king at the time, saw ki hayta elav pnei milchama, that he was facing a battle. Mipanim umeachor, in front of him and behind him. So he is vulnerable, and he's putting himself in a warlike situation because people are arraying against him. Vayivchar mikol bichurei Israel, he selected from the best soldiers of Israel, Vayaroch likrat Aram, and he mustered himself to meet Aram in battle. It almost appears like the beginning of Parshat Vayishlach, where Yaakov and Esav are setting up to meet each other in battle. Viet yeter ha'am, the rest of the troops, the nation, Natan biyad Avshai achiv, he let Avshai, his brother, be responsible for them. Vayaroch likrat b'nei Ammon, and they also arrayed themselves ready for battle. Vayomer, and he, meaning King Joab, said, Im techazak Aram bimeni, if I'm going to be the shock troops, if Aram is stronger than I am, v'haitali lishua, I'm basically going to rely on you to be my Yeshua, my deliverance. V'im bnei Ammon yechechzu mimcha, and if they're too strong for you, v'alachti lo shialach, meaning if in my first battle I get overwhelmed, you save me. If in your first battle you get overwhelmed, I'll come save you. Right? Two brothers running different parts of the same army. Chazak v'nid chazek. You may know that phrase. It's similar to what we say at the end of each book of the Torah. It originates in Moshe's charge to Joshua. Let's be strong. Ba'ad amenu, for the sake of our people. Uba'ad arei Eloheinu, and for the sake of all of the cities of our God. V'Adonai yaseh hatov beinenu, and may God do what's right for us. Vayigash Yoav, and Yoav vayigashed. It's clear here that what does Vayigash make reference to? War. He started the battle, right? There's no question about whether the Vayigash means here, did he go to offer a plea deal? Did he go to offer a compromise? This is, think of Shakespeare and King Henry V. Henry V just gave the pre-war battle cry. The next verb is they move into war, right? Vayigash Yoav v'ha'am asher imo, and the people that was with him, la milchama, to wage war, ba'aram v'yanus mipanav, against the Arameans, and good news, the Arameans fled in front of him. So going back to our midrash, which is the midrash from which Rashi derives this thing, Rabbi Yehuda says it's obvious in this source in the book of Samuel, the verb Vayigash means to approach for war. We read that back into our context. It means that Judah was not coming to appease, according to Rabbi Yehuda. He was coming with all the force he could muster. He's not going to leave until he extracts Benjamin from the king. He's going to fight power with power. One approach. Yes, Irv.
Yeah, it's very forceful.
We need to give Irv the microphone.
You know, we're using words of reconciliation. This is forceful. Irv. Oh. I'm listening. It's very forceful. You know, saying I'm coming. Flat out. You know,
Yeah.
no equivocation.
Right. And Rabbi Judah says, when I hear the word Vayigash, I hear that scene, and I lift that scene into our scene, and I see Judah battling for the people, battling for his brother, battling for God. Okay. Now go to the top of page 2. Hold on. Yeah, sorry, second line of page 2. Rabbi Nechemya says that is not the only use of Vayigash in the Bible. And just like you can quote a proof text that says that Vayigash means war, I can quote a proof text that shows that Vayigash means something else. Rabbi Nechemya Omer, Hagasha lefiyus. He came close to appease. By the way, the word appease might actually be related to the Hebrew lefayes, to appease, right? It might be etymologically related. Hechmat Atamar. How do I know this? Look at the 14th chapter of Joshua. Let's look at the 14th chapter of Joshua. Go to page 3. Okay. Vayigshu, there's our verb, it's in plural. Vayigshu v'nei Yehuda el Yoshua. The descendants of Judah, which again is also interesting because we're talking about Judah in our scene, and the proof text that Rabbi Nechemya is bringing is from the descendants of Judah. The descendants of Judah approached Joshua. Joshua, in the book of Joshua, plays what primary role? What is Joshua's primary role in the book of Joshua? Successor, and what's he doing? He's leading a war, right? He's the commander-in-chief and successor to Moses. The Judahites approached Joshua, Ba Gilgal, at a place called Gilgal. Vayomer Elav, Caleb ben Yefuneh, and Caleb, which was Joshua's sidekick, said to him, Haknizi ata yadata. Caleb ben Yefuneh Haknizi ata yadata et hadavar asher diber Adonai al Moshe ish Elohim al adotai ve'al adotecha b'kadesh b'nei. You remember, Joshua, what God gave as an instruction to me through Moses regarding our situation once Moses was going to die. Ben arba'im shana anochi. I was 40 years old at the time. Bishloach Moshe eved Adonai oti mikadesh barnea. When Moses kind of sent me out to spy the land, this is from Parshat Shlach Lecha, l'ragel et haaretz, to scout the land. Va'eshev oto davar. I returned back the word to him, kasher im levavi, based on what I thought was honest about what I saw. Va'achai asher aluimi, but my other fellow tribesmen who went up into the land with me, himsiv et lev ha'am, they tore out the heart of the people because they came back with a negative report. Va'anochi mileti acharei Adonai Elohai, but I did exactly what God was asked of me. I went and scouted out the land, and we brought back a favorable report so that the Israelites would feel positive about entering the land. Vayishava Moshe bayomahu, and Moses swore on that day, limor, saying, meaning, because I did right, I should get a reward. Imlo haaretz asher darcha raglecha, the land that you're going to walk your foot on, Abba, lacha tiel nachala, it's going to be to you as an inheritance, ulavanecha, and to your children, ad olam, forever. Ki mileta acharei Adonai Elohai, because you were loyal to my God, meaning you get a reward. Verse 10. V'ata hinei hechaya Adonai oti. God has kept me alive all these 40 years. Kasher diber, just as he said, ze 45, 45 v'chamesh Shana, 45 years. So it's now actually 5 years after they got into the land of Israel. Miaz diber Adonai et devar hazeh. We're now on top of page 4. Since God said this to me, El Moshe, asher halach Yisrael b'midbar. They were walking in the desert. Ve'ata hinei anochi hayom ben chamesh u'shmanim shanam. 85 years old. Odenu hayom chazak. I'm still strong. Kasher b'yom shaloach oti Moshe. I'm as strong as I was when Moses sent me out to scout the land that we're now fighting for. Kechochi az ukechochi ata. My strength then is like my strength now. La milchama v'latzeit v'lavo, to be able to kind of go in and out to battle. V'ata tenali et hahar hazeh. All I ask for, I'm finally cashing in my chit. This is my reward. Just give me this mountainous area. Asher diber Adonai, that God said, Bayom hahu ki ata shamata v'yom hahu, because you heard on that day. Ki anakim sham, there are these giants then, va'arim dolot v'tzurot, and these fortified cities. V'ulai Adonai oti v'horashtim kasher diber Adonai, but I will send them out and it'll be yours. So basically, what's happening in the story is the descendants of Judah are saying, we did what we were supposed to do 45 years ago. Caleb did exactly what was asked of him. I want my reward. My reward is this land which had been possessed with the giants, but we dispossessed them. And all this began with a Vayigshu. This is not a Hagasha for war. This is a Hagasha for pleading, right? They approach Joshua, who is the leader of the time, saying, please, let me speak reasonably to you, right? I've earned this, right? It's a very, very different stance than what we read in the book of Samuel. Lift that up from this context, as Rabbi Nechemi wants to do, put it into our context, and you have Judah not flexing his muscles in front of Joseph, whom he doesn't know as Joseph, but rather saying, please, I'm asking for something reasonable. Just listen to me, and you will understand that what I'm asking for has merit. Okay? Alan?
If he's asking for something that's going to be reasonable, how is that viewed as something that's going to give rise to anger?
In terms of the next line, that don't be angry with me?
Yeah.
Right, so if we read this as it's a Hagasha for war, you understand that the phrase don't be angry with me means don't be angry with me even though the stance I'm taking might anger you. If you understand it to be appeasement, then you understand that next line being, even if you might be conditioned to be angry towards someone who comes in front of you with a strong presence, there's no reason to be angry. I'm not asking for anything hard. I'm speaking heart to heart here, right? There are two tones of voices with which one might say, don't be angry with me. And how you use, what tone you use might impact how the person responds, right? That's two of the three. Okay, go back now to the top of page 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lies down the Hebrew middle line. Rabbanan Amre, the rest of the sages says he wasn't approaching for war. He wasn't approaching to appease with soft words. Hagasha l'tfilah. He was approaching for prayer, because we have another context where, guess what? This verb is used. And the verb is used not for war, not for appeasement, but for tefillah. Let's look at the source that begins on the bottom of page 4. First book of Kings, chapter 18, one of the many stories of Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet. We know of Eliyahu because he appears in a few minutes in Havdalah, and he appears on Pesach night, and he appears at a bris, but there are tremendously interesting biblical stories about what Eliyahu did. Okay. So here we go. Vayomer Eliyahu. Elijah said, L'chol ha'am, to all the people there, Gishu Eli, there's our root, come closer to me. Vayigshu chol ha'am, and they all came. Doesn't look like they were coming for war. Doesn't look like they were coming for appeasement. Vayirapeh et mizbach Adonai harus. This is happening immediately after a local altar had been desecrated, and it's interesting that the verb is vayirapeh, which we think of as a medical healing, but he healed or he fixed the altar that had been damaged. Vayikach Eliyahu 12 avanim, he took 12 stones, kemispar shiftei bnei Yaakov, like the number of tribes of Jacob. Asher hayad devar Adonai elav lemor Yisrael yeh ishemecha. Just as God had said, Israel is going to be your name. So he's kind of collecting stones to represent the very tribe that he is trying to bring together. Vayivne et ha'avanim mizbeach b'shem Adonai. He turned those 12 stones representing the tribes into an altar. Vayas ta'ala kevet sa'atayim. He made kind of an open trench that was that could fill 2 seahs. It's a dry measure of seeds. Asaviv l'mizbeach, around the altar. Vayarochet ha'etzim, he set up the wood. Vayinatach ha'par, and he did surgery on, but really what it means is that he cut up the bull for the sacrifice. Vayasem al etzim, he put the meat on the wood. Vayomer, and he said to everyone there, Milu arba'ah chadim, fill up 4 jugs of water. Vayitzku al ha'olah, poured all over the sacrifice. Al etzim, on the wood. Vayomer shnu, he said, do it a second time. Vayishnu, and they did it a second time. Vayomer shaleshu, he said, do it a third time. They did it a third time. Vayalchu hamayim saviv lamizbech, the water filled the area around the altar. V'gamatas halam milamayim, and the trench filled with water. Vayhi ba'alot hamincha, and when it was time to offer up the offering, remember the word mincha originally does not mean an afternoon prayer service, it means a offering or a gift. Vayigash, there's our verb again. Vayigash Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet came. Vayomer, and he said, Adonai Elohei Abraham Yitzchak Yisrael, the God of Abraham, Isaac. It's interesting, it's not Jacob mentioned here, but Yisrael. Hayom Yivada, today it's going to be known. Ki ata Elohim Yisrael, that you are the God of Israel. Vani Abdecha, I'm your servant. Asiti et kol hadvarim ha'ela. I did all these things essentially as you asked. So the rabbis heard their colleague, Rabbi Judah, says he was approaching for war, from our context over there. And they heard Rabbi Nehemiah saying he was approaching to appease, as we saw in the book of Joshua. And they said, no, there's another approaching that I want to connect this to. He was approaching to daven. He was approaching to pray. And I think the rabbis are saying, not that he was approaching to pray as if Joseph is a god, but he was approaching in a prayerful way. He was, or you could say that he did a prayer before he actually approached, because sometimes it's how you prepare for a challenging encounter that impacts the outcome of the encounter. Alan?
Yeah. There's more to this story. Isn't this like some sort of dispute between the Jews and another group of people about whether or not it was going to be done? He says, here, I'm going to do, they couldn't, they were trying to do these other dances to get the fire going.
Different chapter.
Different.
Elijah does a lot of that too, but that specific story is a different chapter of the book of Kings. Yeah.
Okay. It just seems very familiar.
Yeah. Elijah does a lot of that, but the specific story you're thinking about is a different chapter. Just to bring where we are, and then we're gonna close up. Rashi chose, without attribution, to read the verse as meaning either or both. That Judah was saying, "Let my words enter into your ears." That sounds like an appeasement. Or Judah was speaking harshly to him, which is why he had to say, "Please don't get angry with me." That sounds like he was preparing for war. And in the Midrash, we had the third example of he was approaching prayerfully. With that in mind, look at the last source in the bottom of chapter, page 5. This is the commentary of Rabbi David of Kutsk. He's the son of the Kutsker Rebbe. He himself was also a Kutsker Rebbe. When you think of the Kutsker Rebbe, it's not him, this is his son. But he was a sage in his own right. And this is his commentary on this verse. So now look at the third line in Hebrew on page 5, in the second paragraph. Lechora, at face value, milat elav, the word elav, miuteret, is extraneous. Which word elav? If you want to peek back into the top of page 1, the verse has 2 words that opens up that are interesting. Vayigash, that verb, and then the elav. Because you could have read Vayigash Yehuda, Judah approached, right? This is a classic response to find extraneousness in the verse. He approached him. Well, where else would he have approached? Obviously approached him. So why do we need the to him, the elav? It's extraneous. V'ef Sharlomar, it's possible to say, she'elav, the word to him, kavanato, what's intended by it? El atzmo. He, Judah, approached himself. The elav is not Joseph, it's himself. Yehuda chazar al dvarav. Judah repeated himself. This is not the first time Judah asks Joseph to let them free. This is, remember, the story begins in a cliffhanger. This is the second time. And he uses almost the exact same words. Judah repeats himself, Befam Hashniya, on the second time, Lifnei Yosef, the second time he's saying these words in front of Joseph, Ki bashniya amar et hadvarim behitragshut yetera. Because the second time, he said these almost exact same words, behitragshut yetera, with extra sensitive emotionality, me'omek halev, from the depths of the heart. When I began the shiur, I told you that when I began preparing the shiur, I thought I was just following wherever the text was going to go. But when I got here, I realized that something else was driving me the entire time without even realizing it. There were two incidents this week where my first attempt at having a conversation that I wanted Nina to have failed. I won't go into detail, but they failed. It was a delicate interaction and it didn't work. And it's easy when you have an interaction that didn't work to assume that the reason why it didn't work is because of them, whoever the them are. They weren't listening, they weren't open to it, they didn't respond the right way. And each time I had a period of time in between the first one and the second time to, as the Christians might say, but the Jews should say it also, I prayed on it. I prayed on how those interactions went. And at some point in the davening, I went from my frustration with how they handled it to asking myself, well, how did I handle it? And could I have handled it differently? Was I a little bit too much milchama and not enough piyus? A little too much going with my muscles flexed and not enough appeasement. So I read the Midrash as a trio that are interwoven. Sometimes we approach a situation assuming that strength is what's required. When it fails, we pull back, ideally, and ask ourselves in a prayerful moment, what is really what's required? And maybe we can come back a second time with piyus, with appeasement, with a softness that might produce a different result. Not every situation deserves appeasement, certainly geopolitically. Right? Interpersonally, most times, piyus, appeasement, softness works better than milchama. And both these encounters happened before I started preparing this class Friday morning. And both of them ended up okay. And they ended up okay not because the other one had done something wrong and recognized it, but because I realized that I was a Judah doing hagasha, doing approach with milchama, when what the situation needed was piyus, and I wouldn't have gotten there without tefillah. And then I started preparing for this class, and this is where it led me. So sometimes we teach Torah, and sometimes the Torah teaches us. And if you have an encounter this week where you notice it didn't go the way it was supposed to, ask yourself, were my muscles flexed a little bit too much? Pray on it a bit, formally or informally. And maybe you'll find a softer voice that will lead to a better conclusion. Shabbat Shalom.